Indoor Matters with Damien and Sarah.
Welcome back to Indoor Matters, the podcast where we tackle what matters most to your indoor health, especially here in Dubai. I'm Damien, and I'm excited to be joined today by an expert in all things indoor environmental health.
Thanks for having me, Damien. It's always great to chat about this important stuff.
Absolutely. And before we dive in, we want to give a big shout out to our sponsor, Saniservice. They're Dubai's only indoor environmental health quality management company and the go-to experts for anything related to your indoor environment. You know, with all the amazing architecture here in Dubai, sometimes we forget about what's going on inside, right?
You're so right. We're surrounded by these incredible buildings, but what about the air we breathe inside them? That's where Saniservice comes in, making sure our homes and offices are truly healthy spaces.
Exactly. And today we're tackling a topic that's often overlooked, but can have a real impact on your health. Mold. I think a lot of people in Dubai think of it as just a nuisance, a bit unsightly. But the truth is it can be much more than that.
Absolutely, especially with Dubai's humidity. Think about it. You step out of that dry desert heat into a cool, air-conditioned building. Sounds great, right? But that constant shift in temperature and moisture creates the perfect breeding ground for mold.
It's like a hidden world inside our homes, and we often don't realize the potential dangers lurking there. So, Sarah, let's break it down for our listeners. What exactly is mold? What are we dealing with here?
Well, think of it like this. Mold is a type of fungus that's kind of like a tiny, opportunistic gardener. It thrives in damp, humid environments and feeds on organic materials, which, let's face it, are everywhere in our homes, especially here in Dubai with all the luxurious fabrics and finishes.
So our beautiful Dubai homes are basically a feast for mold. That's not what I want to picture when I think of my plush carpets and fancy wallpaper.
Unfortunately, it's true. And the thing is, mold is sneaky. It spreads by releasing microscopic spores into the air, and these tiny spores can quickly colonize new areas, especially if there's moisture and poor ventilation.
Poor ventilation. Yeah, sometimes if it feels like we live in a constant state of air conditioning here in Dubai, is that enough to keep mold at bay?
That's a great question, and it's something a lot of people in Dubai assume. We crank up the AC and we think we're good to go, right? But air conditioning alone isn't always enough. It can actually create a bit of a trap. Think about it. You have these cool, air-conditioned spaces that are often tightly sealed to keep the heat out. But that also means that any moisture that gets in, whether it's from cooking, showering, or even just breathing, can get trapped inside, creating a humid environment that mold just loves.
So our efforts to stay cool are actually making things cozy for mold. That's a bit ironic.
It is. And the thing about mold spores is they're tiny and light, they can travel through the air easily, and they can land on any surface. So even if you don't see mold growing in plain sight, it could be lurking in hidden places, like behind walls, under carpets, or even inside your AC unit.
Okay, that's making me a little itchy just thinking about it. So we've got these tiny mold spores floating around our homes, looking for a place to settle down and start a family. But are all molds created equal? Are there some that are more dangerous than others?
That's the million-dollar question. And the answer is yes. Some molds are definitely more concerning than others. Let's talk about some of the usual suspects you might find in a typical Dubai home. You've got your Aspergillus, which seems to have a particular fondness for AC units. Then there's Cladosporium, which seems to have a thing for carpets and fabrics. And who hasn't encountered Penicillium on a piece of neglected wallpaper?
Those all sound pretty common. Is it just a matter of aesthetics, or do these common molds pose any real health risks?
Well, even common molds can be a problem for people with allergies or asthma. And here in Dubai, with the desert dust and other air quality challenges we face, even a small amount of mold can tip the scales for those with sensitivities. But there's one type of mold that deserves a special mention because it's notorious for its potential toxicity, and that's Stachybotrys chartarum, better known as black mold.
Black mold. That sounds scary. Is that the one we see in those dramatic news stories about contaminated buildings?
That's the one. Now, it's important to note that not all black-colored mold is Stachybotrys, so it's always best to have any suspicious mold professionally identified. But black mold is often associated with severe water damage, and it can produce harmful substances called mycotoxins.
Mycotoxins. What are those, and why should we be concerned about them?
Mycotoxins are basically chemical byproducts that some molds produce, and they can have a range of negative effects on human health. Think of them as the mold's secret weapon, and unfortunately, black mold seems to be particularly good at producing them.
Okay, now I'm officially freaked out. So we've got this invisible enemy lurking in our homes, potentially producing these harmful mycotoxins. What's the worst that could happen?
Well, the effects of mold exposure can vary depending on the individual, the type of mold, and the level of exposure. But let's talk about some of the ways mold can impact our health, because it's not just about those dramatic black mold scenarios. Even common molds can cause problems.
Let's hear it. I'm ready to face the truth about mold and its potential impact on my health.
Okay, so for some people, mold exposure is a minor annoyance, a bit like hay fever, but for others, it can be much more serious. Imagine you're constantly battling allergy symptoms. Sneezing, runny nose, itchy eyes, even skin rashes. That could be mold talking.
I've definitely experienced my fair share of allergies here in Dubai, especially during those humid months. Never thought mold could be the culprit.
It's definitely a possibility. And for people with asthma, mold exposure can trigger or worsen symptoms like wheezing, coughing, and shortness of breath. And in some cases, prolonged exposure to mold can even lead to respiratory problems in people who were previously healthy.
Wow, that's serious. It sounds like mold is not something to be taken lightly. Are there any other health risks we should be aware of?
Yes, there are. For people with weakened immune systems, for example, those undergoing chemotherapy or battling chronic illnesses, exposure to certain types of mold can lead to fungal infections, which can be quite serious.
So it's not just about allergies and respiratory problems. It can actually lead to infections. That's scary. Are there any long-term effects we should be concerned about?
Well, that's where those mycotoxins come into play. Remember those chemical byproducts we talked about earlier? Well, they can have a wide range of effects on our health, and some of them can be quite insidious.
Insidious? What do you mean? Give me the details.
Well, imagine you're constantly battling fatigue headaches or brain fog. You just can't seem to focus or remember things like you used to. Those could be signs of mycotoxin exposure.
Wait, are you telling me that mold could be messing with my brain? That's not what I want to hear.
It's definitely something to consider, especially if you've ruled out other potential causes. Mycotoxins can also weaken your immune system, making you more susceptible to other illnesses.
Okay. I'm starting to feel a little paranoid now. It sounds like mold can wreak havoc on our bodies in so many ways. Is there anything else it can do to us?
You might be surprised. Mold can even irritate your skin and eyes, causing redness, itching, even blisters in severe cases. And let's not forget about conjunctivitis, otherwise known as pink eye, all thanks to those pesky mold spores.
So we've got allergies, respiratory problems, infections, mycotoxins, skin irritations, and pink eye. Is that it? Have we covered all the ways mold can make us miserable?
I think we've hit the major points, but it's important to remember that everyone reacts differently to mold exposure. Some people are highly sensitive, while others might not experience any noticeable symptoms.
So it's kind of like a lottery. You never know how your body will react until you're exposed.
In a way, yes. But there are certain groups of people who are generally more susceptible to the negative effects of mold.
Who are we talking about here? Who needs to be extra careful when it comes to mold?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, people with allergies and asthma are definitely at higher risk, but infants and children are also particularly vulnerable because their immune systems are still developing.
That makes sense. Their little bodies are still learning to fight off all the nasty stuff out there. What about the elderly?
Older adults are another group that needs to be mindful of mold. As we age, our immune systems naturally weaken, making us more prone to respiratory complications from mold exposure.
So we're talking about a significant portion of the population here. Is there anyone else who should be concerned?
Yes, definitely. Individuals with chronic respiratory diseases like COPD are particularly vulnerable to mold's effects. And anyone with a weakened immune system, whether it's due to a medical condition or certain medications, needs to be extra cautious.
It's starting to sound like mold is a threat to everyone. Is there anyone who's immune to its effects?
Well, while some people might not experience any noticeable symptoms, it's important to remember that mold exposure can have cumulative effects. Even if you don't feel it right away, prolonged exposure can still take a toll on your health over time.
So it's kind of like a silent attacker. It could be chipping away at our health without us even realizing it.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to be aware of the risks and take steps to prevent mold growth in our homes.
Okay, so let's shift gears and talk about prevention. What can we do to keep this insidious enemy at bay? How can we protect ourselves and our loved ones from the dangers of mold?
That's a great question, Damien, and one that we'll definitely dive into after a quick break. Stay tuned. So, Damien, before the break, we were talking about how to prevent mold. The key is to think like mold. It needs moisture to thrive, so controlling moisture levels in your home is absolutely crucial.
Okay, makes sense. But we live in Dubai. It's practically built on humidity. How are we supposed to keep our homes dry in this climate?
You're right, it's a constant battle against the humidity here. But there are definitely things you can do. Think of it as a multi-pronged approach. First, ventilation is your best friend. We talked earlier about how air conditioning can sometimes create a trap for moisture, so make sure you're ventilating properly. Open windows whenever possible, especially after showering or cooking, to let that moisture escape. And use those exhaust fans. They're there for a reason.
So basically, don't be afraid to let some fresh air in, even if it means battling the heat for a little bit.
Exactly. Even a few minutes of fresh air circulation can make a big difference in reducing humidity levels. And speaking of humidity, consider investing in a dehumidifier, especially if you live in an older building or if you notice that certain areas of your home tend to feel damp.
Dehumidifiers, got it. Those seem like pretty standard solutions. Anything else we can do to keep our homes dry?
Absolutely. Think about those everyday habits that might be contributing to moisture buildup. For example, drying clothes indoors is a big no-no, especially in Dubai. Even if you're using a drying rack, that moisture is going straight into the air.
That's a good point. I guess those laundry rooms in Dubai apartments aren't just for aesthetics.
Exactly. And don't forget about those little leaks and drips that we often tend to ignore. A leaky faucet or a dripping pipe might seem minor, but that constant moisture can create the perfect breeding ground for mold. So be proactive. Fix those leaks as soon as you notice them.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture. Control moisture, ventilate well, and fix those leaks. Got it. But what if, despite our best efforts, we still end up with a mold problem? What then?
Well, the first step is to identify the source of the moisture. Mold is like a symptom, a warning sign that something's not quite right in your indoor environment. So you need to figure out what's fueling that mold growth. Is it a leaky pipe? Is it condensation on a cold surface? Is it just poor ventilation? Once you've identified the source, you can address the underlying issue and then move on to removing the mold itself.
So it's like a detective game. We have to find the molds, accomplish the source of the moisture before we can truly eliminate the threat.
Exactly. And when it comes to mold removal, the approach will depend on the extent of the infestation. For small patches of mold, you might be able to tackle it yourself with a simple solution of water and detergent or white vinegar. But safety first. Always wear protective gear like gloves and a mask when cleaning up mold.
So we can be DIY mold busters, but only for those minor cases? When does it become necessary to call in the professionals?
If you're dealing with a large area of mold, if you suspect it might be black mold, or if you're simply not comfortable tackling it yourself, then it's definitely time to call in the experts. Professional mold remediation companies have the knowledge, experience, and specialized equipment to handle the job safely and effectively.
Makes sense. I'm not sure I want to go head-to-head with black mold on my own. But what exactly do these professionals do? What does a mold remediation process look like?
Well, it usually starts with a thorough inspection to assess the extent of the mold growth and identify the underlying cause. Then they'll contain the affected area to prevent mold spores from spreading during the removal process.
So they basically quarantine the mold, like a hazmat situation.
Pretty much. They want to make sure those pesky spores don't escape and colonize other areas of your home. Next, they'll use specialized cleaning techniques and products to remove the mold from all surfaces. This might involve HEPA vacuuming, air scrubbing, and antimicrobial treatments.
Wow, it sounds pretty intense. Is that the end of the process?
Not quite. Once the mold is removed, they'll work on restoring any damaged materials and addressing the underlying moisture issue that caused the mold in the first place. They might also recommend some preventative measures like installing dehumidifiers or improving ventilation to reduce the risk of future mold growth.
So it's a comprehensive approach. They don't just remove the mold, they make sure it doesn't come back.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to choose a reputable mold remediation company, one that has the expertise and commitment to do the job right. And speaking of reputable companies, we can't forget to mention our sponsor, Saniservice.
Absolutely. Saniservice is Dubai's leading indoor environmental health quality management company. They're not just experts in mold remediation, they offer a whole range of services to create healthier indoor environments.
Exactly. What's really impressive is their commitment to staying ahead of the curve. They have their own in-house microbiology lab where they analyze mold samples and develop customized remediation strategies.
Wow, their own lab. That's serious dedication to the science of mold.
Yeah.
What else sets them apart?
Well, they also have a dedicated indoor sciences division that's constantly researching and developing new and innovative ways to prevent and remove mold. They're not just reacting to problems, they're actively working to find solutions for the future.
That's amazing. So they're not just cleaning up mold, they're actually pushing the boundaries of mold prevention and remediation.
Exactly. And they're doing it all right here in Dubai, specifically addressing the unique challenges of our climate and building practices.
That's what I love about Saniservice.
Yeah.
They're local experts who truly understand the specific needs of our city.
You know, Damon, something I've noticed is that there are a lot of misconceptions about mold out there. And honestly, sometimes these myths can actually be more dangerous than the mold itself because they prevent people from taking the necessary precautions or seeking professional help when they need it.
Ooh, I love a good myth-busting session.
hmm
What are some of the most common mold myths you've encountered? Let's debunk them.
Okay, let's start with one that I hear all the time, especially here in Dubai. Mold can't grow in my house because I keep it so clean.
Oh, the classic "my house is spotless" defense. I'm sure you've heard that one a few times.
Countless times, but unfortunately, cleanliness alone can't prevent mold growth. Remember, mold is an opportunist. It thrives on moisture, not dirt. So even if your home is sparkling clean, if there's excess humidity or a hidden water leak, mold can still take hold. It's like those pesky fruit flies that seem to appear out of nowhere no matter how clean your kitchen is.
That's a great analogy. We can scrub and polish all we want, but if the conditions are right, mold will find a way. What's another common mold myth that needs to be busted?
Here's one that I find particularly concerning. Bleach is the ultimate mold killer.
Bleach does have a pretty powerful reputation. It seems like the go-to solution for any kind of stain or germ. Is it not effective against mold?
While bleach can certainly kill mold on hard, non-porous surfaces like tiles or countertops, it's not as effective on porous materials like wood drywall or fabrics. In fact, using bleach on these surfaces can actually make the problem worse because it introduces additional moisture, which mold loves. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline.
So bleach is a bit of a double-edged sword when it comes to mold. It might seem like a quick fix, but it could actually be backfiring on us. What's a better approach for dealing with mold on those porous surfaces?
It's best to consult with a professional mold remediation company. They have the knowledge and specialized products to effectively treat mold on all types of surfaces without causing further damage. And remember, it's not just about killing the visible mold, it's about addressing the underlying moisture issue and preventing the mold from returning.
So it's like treating the root cause rather than just the symptoms.
Exactly.
Okay, what other mold myths are out there? Let's keep debunking.
Here's one that often pops up. Mold is only a problem in old buildings.
I think we both know that's not true here in Dubai. We have plenty of new buildings with their fair share of mold issues.
Exactly. Mold doesn't discriminate based on age. In fact, new buildings can sometimes be even more susceptible to mold growth because they're often tightly sealed for energy efficiency, which can trap moisture inside. And as we all know, construction practices here in Dubai, while constantly improving, can sometimes leave room for moisture to sneak in during the building process. It's like a recipe for mold.
It's true. I heard stories of brand new luxury apartments with hidden mold problems lurking behind those fancy finishes.
It happens more often than you might think. So whether your building is old or new, vigilance is key.
Okay, one last mold myth for the road. What else do we need to debunk?
This one is particularly relevant in our climate. Air conditioning prevents mold growth.
The air conditioning myth. I think we've all fallen for that one at some point. We crank up the AC and assume we're invincible against mold.
I know, it's so tempting to think that way, especially when it's scorching hot outside. But while air conditioning can certainly help to lower humidity levels, it's not a foolproof solution for mold prevention. In fact, AC units themselves can become breeding grounds for mold if they're not properly cleaned and maintained. Think about it. Those cool, damp coils inside your AC unit are the perfect environment for mold to thrive.
That's not a pleasant thought. So even our trusty air conditioners can betray us and become mold factories.
It's possible, and if your AC isn't effectively removing moisture from the air, you could still be creating a humid environment that encourages mold growth.
Okay, so the takeaway here is that air conditioning is a helpful tool in the fight against mold, but it's not a magic bullet. We still need to be proactive about controlling moisture, ventilating properly, and maintaining those AC units.
Exactly.
So we've talked about the risks of mold, how to prevent it, and when to call in the professionals. What are some key takeaways our listeners should remember?
The biggest one is awareness. Just knowing that mold can be a problem here in Dubai is a huge step. Once you're aware of the risks, you can start taking those preventative measures we talked about, like controlling moisture and ventilating well. And if you do spot mold, don't ignore it. Take action, whether it's cleaning it up yourself or calling in the experts.
Great advice. As we were prepping for this episode, I was thinking about all the unique challenges we face in Dubai. We have this amazing mix of modern and traditional architecture, but it seems like every building has its own quirks and vulnerabilities when it comes to mold.
You're absolutely right. Dubai is a melting pot of architectural styles, which is part of what makes it so fascinating. But that diversity also means we have to be extra vigilant about mold. Those beautiful, intricately designed villas might have hidden nooks and crannies where moisture can accumulate, while those sleek, modern high-rises can trap humidity if the ventilation systems aren't properly designed or maintained. It's like a recipe for mold.
It's like each building has its own personality, and we need to learn to read those signs to identify potential mold risks. Are there any specific things Dubai residents should be looking out for?
Well, for starters, pay attention to those subtle changes in your indoor environment. A musty smell is often the first clue that mold might be present. And keep an eye out for any signs of water damage, like stains on walls or ceilings peeling paint or warped flooring. Those are all red flags that moisture is getting and creating a prime environment for mold growth.
It's like playing mold detective. We have to be observant and look for those subtle clues that something might be amiss.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And don't underestimate the importance of regular maintenance. We talked earlier about keeping those AC units clean and functioning properly, but it's also important to check for leaks and make sure your gutters and drains are clear. Remember, prevention is always better than cure when it comes to mold.
So true. We can't just sit back and expect our buildings to take care of themselves. We have to be proactive and vigilant.
And that's where a company like Saniservice comes in. They're not just about fixing problems, they're about empowering people to take control of their indoor environments and create truly healthy spaces.
I love that. It's about shifting our mindset from reactive to proactive when it comes to indoor health.
Absolutely. And Saniservice offers such a wide range of services, from air quality testing to Legionella risk assessments. They really are a one-stop shop for all your indoor environmental needs.
It's like having a personal health coach for your home. They can help you identify potential risks, create a customized plan, and make sure your indoor environment is as healthy as it can be.
Exactly, and they're constantly innovating and developing new solutions to address the unique challenges we face here in Dubai. For instance, did you know they're pioneering the use of cold plasma technology for mold remediation?
Cold plasma. That sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. Tell me more.
Well, it's actually based on sound science. Cold plasma technology uses energized gas to neutralize mold spores at a molecular level. It's a safe, effective, and eco-friendly approach to mold remediation.
Wow, that's impressive. So they're not just removing mold, they're actually destroying those pesky spores completely.
Exactly. It's a game changer in the fight against mold. And it's just one example of how Saniservice is constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the field of indoor environmental health.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything there is to know about mold in Dubai. It's been a fascinating and informative conversation, and I'm sure our listeners are now armed with the knowledge they need to protect their homes and their health.
I hope so. Remember, knowledge is power when it comes to mold. The more you know, the better equipped you are to create a healthier indoor environment for yourself and your loved ones.
Well said. And a huge thank you to our sponsor, Saniservice, for their dedication to creating healthier indoor environments for everyone in Dubai.
Yes. Thank you, Saniservice.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on Indoor Matters. We hope you found this episode informative and empowering. Until next time, stay healthy, stay curious, and breathe easy.